Hi, everyone. Again, welcome. This is the Latin American Ethnography Seminar Series. This is our first session for the winter term. And for those of you who haven't joined us previously, this is an initiative hosted by CLACS, which is part of the Institute of Languages, Cultures and Societies at the School of Advanced Study, University of London. It is a seminar run in collaboration with CROLAC, which is the Center for Research in Latin America and the Caribbean at Queen Mary University in London, with CISRUL, which is the Center for Citizenship, Civil Society, and Rule of Law at the University of Aberdeen, and the Spanish National Research Council. We are three conveners, Ainhoa Montoya, Jessica Sclair, and myself, Denise Roman. And today we will hear from Daniel Morales, who is professor and researcher of anthropology at El Colegio Michoacán, and who will give somehow very current affairs related presentation, which is entitled Linguistic Landscapes and Externalization of Migration in Three Coach Stations in Mexico. So before we begin, let me just share with you a little few housekeeping rules. Daniel will have around between 30 and 40 minutes for his presentation. And afterwards, we will open up for a Q&A. And we aim to finish around 6 p.m. in the UK. Just please keep your microphones on mute during Daniel's talk. And if you'd like to ask a question during the Q&A, you can always raise your hand using your hand or your hand function on Zoom, or you can always pop them on the chat box and I will read those out. Also, we are recording the presentation, but not the Q&A, and it will be available soon at the CLACS website. So Daniel, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica, Ainhoa, and Denise for your invitation. I think I'm going to start sharing my screen so we can go straight to the presentation and make the most of it. By what's this? Just let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can.
And now go there. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So as Denise said, we're going to be talking about linguistic landscapes and the externalization of migration in three coast stations in Mexico. From a sociolinguistic perspective, that is somehow informed by linguistic anthropology and ethnographic perspectives within the very wide field of sociolinguistics. And today I'm going to be talking about context, some research questions guiding the presentation in order to delimit the discussion. And given that you see from the title, very theoretical based approach, I'm going to be drawing on some key concepts coming from geosemiotics. And I will talk you through these concepts because for me, these are important for the analysis that I'm going to be offering as we move on in the presentation. I will briefly talk about the methodology, given that this is part of a larger research study. And then I will refer to some conclusions. Well, first of all, I think it's very important to locate this study within the political and geographical context of Mexico. This is a map of Mexico showing the location of different migrant shelters along the country. As you can see, well, there are more than 86 migrant shelters located in strategic places basically migration routes that many people coming from Central America, the Caribbean, South America, or even African countries use. But I'm showing you this because I'd like you to um, situate yourselves within this part of the country, that is the central part of the country, and this is the exact location where I conducted um, my research study, and this is where I collected data in Querétaro, for example, the state of Hidalgo and the state of Mexico. So this is the central part of Mexico that, in my view, has received very little attention as to migration issues, given that most migration oriented research is based in the south border or in the north border of Mexico. Right. Um, so as you may be familiar with this picture, um, these are pictures of signage and what is called the Transporta Pueblos, that is on the right-hand side of your screen, that I took as I was conducting a larger research study. And the Transporta Pueblos were peyote-shaped sculptures created by Mexican artist Alfredo Gutierrez and migrants from Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, Cuba, and locals who placed them along the railroad tracks in 9 different states, including Chiapas and Querétaro. So this photo was taken in Querétaro. Both the signage and the sculptures share useful information such as maps, telephone numbers of legal organizations that many migrants may need to get their bearings as they are on their way to the US-Mexico border. In fact, Alfredo Gutierrez wrote La Bestia, the cargo train that many migrants from various countries used to cross Mexico to make sure the coyote sculptures were visible and placed in useful locations for migrants. But why am I showing you this? Or why should we pay attention to language, image in a public space? Well, to understand the relevance and the emergence of these cultures, it's important to offer part of the historical context in which migration, particularly Central American migration through Mexico, has occurred. As many of you may know, migration from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to Mexico increased in the 90s, and many of these people use La Bestia, or the cargo train that I've just mentioned, uh, to try to reach their US Mexico border destinations. On their way, they face extortions by authorities and also other different types of violence, like forced recruitment by criminal gangs. But moving fast forward in October 2018, the arrival of migrant caravans put international attention from scholars and civil society organizations. Due to the dangers and extortions that many migrants have faced as they cross Mexico, migrants organize themselves into large groups of people as a protection and support strategy that could enable them to arrive at the US-Mexico border. The first migrant caravan started in Honduras in October 2018, and it was highly heterogeneous since it was made up by families, adults, and teenagers, many of whom traveled unaccompanied. Migrant caravans, it is important to note, are a type of migration that does not replace migration flows through other means, such as cargo trains, and does not amount to 10% of the estimated number of people, that is, 300,000 to 500,000 people crossing Mexico annually. In 2019, the US government threatened to impose tariffs on Mexican imports if Mexican authorities did not stop migration flows from Central America. As a response, the Mexican government reinforced migration controls in its south and north borders by deploying more than 25,000 National Guard members to control undocumented migration. It also mandated that coach companies ask people to share an identity document, such as a passport or a voting ID card, to use their services. Presence of ID requirement signs has become more evident in various coach stations and the ticket offices, and has been concomitant with agreements in which coach companies have to inform state authorities of the presence of undocumented migrants. Furthermore, Mexican authorities have closely monitored highway routes to stop coaches and remove undocumented migrants traveling on them. However, US-Mexico cooperation on migration management is not a new practice. Mexico began to function as a border country after the signing of the 1992 North America Free Trade Agreement with the US. And many Central American migrants moving through Mexico to the US have faced the Mexican transit control regime. This is a system that aims to intercept, detain, and deter migrants in the United States, and that originated in the signing of Plan of Action for Cooperation and Border Safety in 2001. The Mexican transit control regime has been instrumental for Mexican authorities to intercept almost 2.5 million migrants from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, representing 90% of the total population. This intersection and detention practice has been reinforced by other strategies such as the Merida Initiative in 2007 and the South Border Plan in 2014. Although the Merida Initiative was a US foreign aid program to fight organized crime and drug trafficking through intelligence sharing and law enforcement operations in Mexico's south border, it resulted in stricter immigration surveillance. For instance, the US Department of Homeland Security provided the Mexican government with $50 million to acquire equipment such as night vision devices, maritime sensors, and patrol boats in 2011. In 2014, funding for migration security technology was up to 112 million under the same initiative. As to the South Border Plan, this was originally presented as a program for protecting migrants. However, it also resulted in the systematic persecution and detention of migrants by removing them from cargo trains and establishing checkpoints on their migration routes. In addition, major investments to improve railroad infrastructure were made to allow private-owned cargo trains to travel at a higher speed, which has functioned as a deterrent practice by making migrants' journey more perilous. So, in this context, this work analyzes the linguistic landscape, understood as the language of public road signs, advertising billboards, street names, place names, but more concretely, the language in place in three coast stations. So here we've got the guiding questions that I'm not going to read aloud to you because I don't want to bore you with too much reading. But I would like to mention that by focusing on the presence and use of signage in coach stations, we account for how language in place illustrates a multi-layered migration policy in a so-called transit country such as Mexico. Human mobility is not merely regulated by physical borders or the intervention of the military that has received a great deal of attention, but by symbolic means that organize human behavior. Furthermore, the study of language in place contributes to our understanding of why and how people circumvent and navigate various regimes of mobility. Now, in order to become familiar with some theoretical constructs here, we've got um, five instrumental constructs that I'm going to mobilize once we get to the analysis part of this presentation. And the first one is the interaction order, understood as social relations in particular places, like coach stations, in which a historical body is constructed. The historical body stands for social actors' life experiences, their goals, their purposes, and their unconscious way of acting and thinking. The historical body draws attention to what people can do in social action since their trajectories and experiences are revealed when they engage in a social situation. As a late sociolinguist, as Blomert put it, whenever people enter social action, they bring along their own skills, experiences, a kind of baggage that conditions and constrains what they can do. In the context of this study, this kind of baggage is consequential for people, that is, undocumented migrants whose migration trajectories are targeted by the signs in place, and these mark social boundaries and produce social identities around normative, legitimate, and expected behavior. So in this light, the historical body of the migrant is constructed around notions of legitimacy, such as entering the country through the right channels with identity documents which are to entitle them to use a space and thus maybe engage in a service encounter such as buying a coach ticket. The following construct is emplacement that refers to where in the physical world is the sign or language placed. And it's important because it draws attention to the meaning system of spatial organization. That is a semiotic process that results from the specific location of signs and the material world. In other words, to have its intended meaning, a sign must be read and interpreted in context. For instance, a speed limit sign placed in an office would not have the same meaning as if it were placed on a street. This brings about the fact that space embodies meaning and value and imposes its own rules, possibilities, and restrictions on communication. This doesn't mean that human oh, sorry. This doesn't mean that human action is not acknowledged. Indeed, space is historically transformed, as stated above, by deliberate human intervention and meaning making. Now, another construct that I can also use as a type of unit of analysis for this discussion is the material that signs are made of, because they may convey meaning about permanence, durability, temporality, newness, or even institutional character, as we will see later on in the analysis. So I've chosen to focus on the materials since signs and images may be more meaningful depending on certain characteristics. In the context of this study, there are institutional signs displayed on laminated paper and screens that illustrate an official ID check policy that creates social groupings. The following construct is indexicality that many of you may be familiar with. Um, and this refers to the context dependency of signs, meaning that any material object indicates or refers to something other than itself. Indexicality, in that sense, is not merely the notational meaning contained within its locale of production, but it entails paying attention to social meaning, values, and structures. For example, take the traffic light. The traffic light not only narrowly manages the flow of vehicles to an intersection, but also indexes the regulatory powers and apparatus that have placed the traffic lights and which maintain its functioning. In this sense, indexicality helps us establish the links between the sign, its emerging meaning, its interrelated socio-political scales, and social actors. So a sign must have been put there and must be interpreted by someone. So what does a sign requiring an ID document such as a passport and placed in a ticket office of a coach station index? How does such a sign index the transformation of space that may manage or direct human behavior? Finally, the last term is the externalisation of borders that you can see in the title of the presentation, and that I understand as processes which produce and reinforce relations of inequality in the management of mobility between states and civil society, organization, and migrants. For example, airlines and other transport companies undertake passport and visa checks. In Mexico, a case in point is the role of coach companies whose staff have played a similar role and that have agreed to inform migration authorities of the presence of undocumented migrants. And then briefly, as I said before, this presentation is part of a larger study. I conducted multi-site ethnography in three different states, but I also concentrated on a migrant shelter situated in the state of Mexico, trying to document and understand migrants' narratives of migration control, particularly in this context. Um, So part of this work also involved participant observation, informal conversations, um, and photography of both the migrant shelter and coach stations in the state of Mexico, Querétaro, and Hidalgo. Now, you already know where in Mexico these places are. Um, and these places were also my places of residence and work from 2019 to 2023. So this study was conducted in 7 months, divided in two stages, because COVID-19 actually interrupted the development of the study. And the first stage went from October 2019 to March 2020. Um, and the second stage resumed and ended in June 2021. Um, so what I was using the coach stations in these three states, I was frequently asked to show my ID before purchasing a coach ticket in each of these states. So um, here we've got our first linguistic landscape. This is the state of Mexico. So figure one shows a sign reading by a mandate of the federal government to purchase your ticket, you are required to show any of the following ID documents. So as we can see, this is a text-laden sign located at the ticket office of a coach company that we can clearly see there in the state of Mexico, where 12 coach lines offer services to north border states, such as Tamaulipas and other Mexico's north border cities. And in this context, we see one of the constants that I introduced before, the interaction order, and becomes evident through the list of identity requirements that both open and close possibilities of human behavior and transactions. Such a list marks social boundaries between social actors and larger institutions such as a coach company, since it seems to be directed not to any coach user but to Mexican citizens, apparently, who may be able to produce a voting card, a military service card that can be obtained after military service, a passport, and not a visa that Central American migrants are required to have to enter Mexico. It additionally asks for a professional license that Mexican professionals can obtain after graduation from university through an often lengthy process. In this vein, design contributes to the construction of a historical body by drawing nationality-based distinctions that are either to sanction or constrain the use and access to a means of transport. That is, the historical body of the migrant is constructed around notions of citizenship and legitimacy to be in the country. The interaction order is also reinforced by the material and emplacement of the sign, the material of which it is made, that is laminated paper, depicts its intended durability as well as its institutional character by bearing the coach company logo. By being in place at a ticket office, the sign not only informs users of the ID requirements to purchase a coach ticket, but reorganizes social space by controlling and redirecting human behavior. The lack of an identity document um, means that alternate routes must be sought. In other words, the sign contributes to the transformation of social space into a normative instrument by attempting to regulate people's mobility. On several occasions in the same coach station, I was asked for my ID to buy a coach ticket and inquired why I needed to meet that requirement that contradicts Article 11 of Mexico's Constitution. This states that every person has the right to enter and leave the republic as well as travel to its territory and move their place of residence without a security card, passport, safe conduct, or other similar requirements. The coach company staff at times asked me, "Are you a journalist?" Or recurrently responded that they were following instructions and were thus instructed to not give more information about the ID check policy. So within a logic of the interaction order and its interplay with the historical body, my ability to show an ID not only allowed me to approach the ticket office and navigate the social and political boundaries established by the government. It was indeed my ticket to board the plane. As we will see in the following case, an ID indices larger surveillance mechanisms that could be found in other geographical regions inside the country. So this is the state of, the coach station in the state of Querétaro. And figures 3 to 4 show the linguistic landscape where about 30 coach companies operate and cover different south and northbound destinations. Figure 4, for example, corresponds to a coach company that offers journeys to northern Mexican cities such as Mexicali, Tijuana. And as we saw in the previous linguistic landscape, an identity document such as a voting card, a military service card, a driver's license, passport, professional license, a visa, or a regional visitor card is required to board cualquiera de nuestras marcas, any of our coach lines, as shown in figure 3. That indeed serve US destinations where Mexicans also need to show a visa. However, the generalized character and fulfillment of the identity requirement still seems to be directed to a particular population. In this sense, an interaction order is accomplished, in the sense that social boundaries between citizens, documented and undocumented migrants are marked. By referring to a visa, the sign constructs a particular historical body whose possession of a visa grants access to a means of transport and thus produces issues of morality as to the right channels of migration. Holding and showing a visa implies leaving out a social group who may not have had the resources to apply for or obtain one and who may have traveled alternate migration channels to enter Mexico. In addition, the requirement of the regional visitor card, that is Tarjeta de Visitante Regional or TVR in Spanish, continues to shape social boundaries between social actors and the institution. But let us be clear here. Such a document must be shown by people from Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Belize when they wish to visit Mexico's south states such as Chiapas, Campeche, Quintana Roo, Tabasco, and Yucatan for 7 days. So this raises several questions. Why would this document be required in central Mexico? Could this be a way to watch those people who are far from Mexico's south border and are not where they are meant to be, given Mexico's history of detaining and deporting migrants? Or did the coach company mean a different type of document, such as the card for humanitarian reasons, in Spanish, Tarjeta de Visitante por Razones Humanitarias, that is TVRH in Spanish, that could still be used to detect those people on the move? That is, a card for humanitarian reasons allows people to move from one state to another in Mexico, but requires that the holder remains in the state where such document was issued. So, is this part of the permanent and standardized signage that this coach company exhibits across geographical regions? Well, the questions remind us of the social relevance of the linguistic landscape, how images represent the real social world, and how we use images to do other things in the world. The text-populated image not only shows instructions that users should follow before boarding a coach, but brings forth its institutional attributes displayed on a type of material, that is a screen, that lends itself to a more durable character of it. In addition, its emplacement is consequential for the identities it targets. By being placed behind the counter where coach tickets may be purchased, the linguistic landscape acquires a social meaning that transforms the functions of the coach company staff. Again, when I asked them why they were asking those ID documents, the recurrent answer was it is a federal mandate. That is, they neither inform of what is required of coach users, nor are their roles limited to sell tickets. Rather, they are attributed a role similar to migration officers who are in charge and who are authorized of checking passports, visa, or other identity documents that validate the legal state of a person. The lack of an identity document rules out the possibility of accomplishing a human transaction, such as the purchase of a ticket in a physical place that is, in this life, politically reconfigured. It must be noted that signs in place derive the meaning not only of the immediate location, they also index sociopolitical structures that contribute to the organization of human behavior and, in this case, mobility. In this sense, the signs analyzed so far index the externalization of borders in which first states such as Mexico can regulate migration flows by the involvement of coach companies. The migration control function contributes to the historical transformation of the coast station into a space of policing and surveillance that may be consequential for those identities to which the linguistic landscape points. Now we've got another context, and this is Hidalgo. And as we've seen in the two previous type stations, the linguistic landscape shows the social and political relevance of it. Figure 6, which is located next to a ticket office and close to the manager's office, that is figure 5, that foregrounds its authoritative character, begins to delineate those social performances and identities such as citizen versus non-citizen, who are either sanctioned or forbidden to use a particular space. To buy a ticket or board a coach, it is a mandatory requirement to show an official ID, o en Spanish, para adquirir un boleto será un requisito obligatorio presentar alguna identificación oficial. Figure 6 thus establishes an interaction order by either qualifying or disqualifying certain social actors from engaging in a particular service encounter, such as buying or obtaining a coach ticket. It marks boundaries between those who can prove their citizenship and those who cannot. Figure 7 also contributes to this exclusionary interaction order by pointing to the type of social arrangement and behavior that individuals should orient themselves and need, show both your ticket and ID. Given that it is posted next to a guarded door that leads to a waiting room which only coach ticket holders are allowed to use, its emplacement is not inconsequential. On the one hand, it intertwines with an interaction order in that it reinforces a type of social behavior that must be met. On the other hand, its emplacement both transcends and regulates physical space by interacting with online space to demarcate the possibilities of human mobility of those users who may intend to circumvent the policy in place. That is, si adquiriste tu boleto digital, tu identificación debes mostrar. Okay, that's sort of a nice line that is certainly not entertaining. In English, if you got your ticket online, you must show your ID. As one makes it through the guarded door and enters the waiting room, one keeps on encountering a linguistic landscape that shows the structure of the place. Through its visual elements, figure 8 combines text and image to remind, recuerda, and target a particular social group, such as foreign travelers, usuarios extranjeros, of the identity documents that they are required to show: visa, permanent residence, temporary residence, and refugee status documents. The material of the sign, that is the screen, bearing the logo of the coach company, gives these requirements a more durable and institutional character, which foreign travelers must observe. However, its emplacement draws attention to the regulation of space. The sign is only visible and accessible to those who made it through the guarded door and may become meaningful for that social group whose social behavior is targeted. In this sense, space embodies meaning, in that we see the production of both a stratified interaction order and a historical body in a room that only those who possess an identity document are allowed to occupy. So we should remind ourselves that a linguistic landscape also carries ideological implications and can become symbolic representations of worldviews. The linguistic landscape in Figure 8 points to larger migration policies, pointing and reproducing a discourse of safe migration, as you can see in Viaja Seguro, right at the bottom of it. And it indexes a way of managing human mobility as a safe, orderly, regular, and state-sanctioned migration, which was established at the Global Compact for Migration, an intergovernmentally negotiated agreement supported by the UN and member states such as Mexico. The interaction between the material, the emplacements, and the indexicality of the sign illustrates larger migration policies that locally stratify social space by targeting undocumented migrants, a historical body whose trajectory and mobility research may be constrained. So to conclude this presentation, we can say that institutional linguistic landscapes politically organized social space through an interaction order, their emplacement, and the materials that target a particular group of people whose mobility may be regulated or even redirected. Space is never neutral. By pointing to valid identity documents, institutional linguistic landscapes signal and reinforce legitimized means of migration that not everyone can afford. The indexical value of linguistic landscapes exhibits externalisation practices as policies constitutive of a set of social mechanisms which are responsible for the reproduction and changing shape of social, economic, and political border making processes. In other words, borders are not necessarily erected physically in border cities where the military or other state authorities enforce migration control mechanisms. In the context of this study, Mexico's migration policies are neither strictly local nor merely physical. They rather underscore the reconfiguration of institutions in a transnational scale that shapes circuits of human mobility. Finally, at a time when states around the world are attempting to contain migration flows in transit countries, the analysis of language in place goes beyond examining its communicative meaning. Examining language in place entails focusing on the ideological implications that linguistic landscapes carry, and thus interdisciplinary work is encouraged to understand and challenge the dialogic interaction between language and the sociopolitical structures that seek to constrain human mobility. Therefore, we must remind ourselves of the Transporta Pueblos, those coyote-shaped sculptures placed along railroad tracks to guide women, men, children, friends, fathers, husbands, wives, people who in many cases do not choose to use a cargo train, but that will continue to find a way to keep moving. And well, those are some of the sources that anyone is interested in that can share. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel, for this fascinating presentation